Good morning to you all. Isn't it amazing how differently you see your own country when you move abroad for a while? Things that you've always taken for granted all of a sudden aren't available anymore, and things you may not have known existed become part of everyday life. I certainly experienced that when I moved to the US in the late 1980s for my studies. I can safely say that that was the time when I really got to know the Netherlands. And I can just imagine for you as expats in a country like the Netherlands with a very different birth system to where you come from, it can't always be very easy. Now, pregnant women are vulnerable, and that's not because they cannot walk fast or run. It's because they're willing to go through an awful lot for the benefit and the well-being of their babies. They're willing to put up with lots of things. They're willing to make enormous sacrifices. Because what they want for their babies is the best possible pregnancy, the best possible birth, and the best possible life. And they're willing to go through enormous lengths to get that. And I think that's exactly why you're here today, because you want to give your baby the best possible start in life. There it is. Isn't this what every pregnant woman dreams about? And expecting father, what I really like about this picture is that it could be a mum or a dad. And obviously it's not just the baby that's happy. I think the person holding the baby is very happy too. So I thought very long and hard about what I want to tell you today. And I will tell you about our system. I will tell you about the good and the bad and the unexpected. But first and foremost, I have a much more pressing message for you. I want you to be very selfish. I want you to be utterly selfish and to demand your best possible birth experience. And this actually may be the country and the place where you can get that. This funny country with its strange habits and its weird quirks. Because I've been thinking about what I find the weirdest quirk in the Dutch culture. And what I've noticed ever since I lived abroad is that the Dutch are what I would call over-assertive. In private, they're very honest and in your face with their opinions. And in the public space, it seems like they really demand their own autonomous place. And I don't know why that is. It may be because we're a small country with a huge population, but Dutch people seem to take utter delight in blocking a path, preferably in a small group, completely oblivious to everybody else. They'll block an aisle of a supermarket as if the whole place is theirs. They'll be on the sidewalk as if the whole city is theirs. And they never apologize, and they never get out of the way. I don't know if that's your experience too, but I notice that all the time. And I can see you're laughing, so I think that's what you've noticed as well. And of course, the Dutch also have very endearing qualities and great traits. We make pretty good bread. I think we produce great cheese. But most important now, we have a wonderful midwifery system, which, if you work it well, may provide you with choices that you won't get anywhere else in the world. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. You're here to give your baby its best possible start in the world, in its life. And I'm sure you're not quite clear on how you're going to best go about that. But you may feel a little bit like this, a little pensive. Now, how do I organize my way in this really weird system? I want you to know you have choices. And I want you to go for your autonomy. And as I said before, I want you to really be selfish. And why do I want that from you? Because I care about women and I care about babies. And a good start, a good birth experience is important not just for the mother's mental and physical health, but also for the mental and physical health of her baby. Now, I think it's time that I make a little confession. I love statistics. I love facts and figures and medical research and science. I love it so much. When I was pregnant in the US, I had a book next to my bed, and I'm not joking, that contained all the clinical trials available at that time about how to best go about pregnancy and birth care. It was for professionals, but I had it next to my bed. It was about this big. They didn't have a website at that point. And I'm not telling you that's what you should do, but just to give you some idea of how my mind works. Actually, I even raise my children evidence-based. When there is medical evidence and psychological evidence on how to go about things, I think you should use it. And that doesn't mean that you can't work with your heart. It doesn't mean that emotions are not important. On the contrary, there's so much evidence now, so much science on how important emotions are, especially in the domain of childbirth. And what do we know about science, from science, about what's important in childbirth? And if I want to sum it up for you, what's really incredibly important is that the woman is in charge, that it's her birth. She's the one who's putting the baby in the world, not the midwife, not the obstetrician. She is in charge. And a woman who's really in control will have her best possible birth experience. She needs to choose who is there at the birth. She needs to choose where she wants to give birth. She needs to choose what position to take. And if she can truly do that, if she can put this baby into the world, then she'll feel empowered and powerful, and she'll have a much better chance of having her best possible birth experience. And why is that important? Even if we don't care about women's well-being, it's important for the baby. So even if you want to be just a good mother for your baby, make sure that you get your best birth experience. Because we know from really good research that women who have a good birth experience, who are proud of what they did, are also much better capable of bonding with their babies. And women who've been very traumatized through the birth will have a much worse start at life. It doesn't mean that they can't do it, but the odds that they find it difficult are just so much larger. So even if you only care about your baby, make sure that you get the birth experience that you feel most comfortable with. 1 to 2% of pregnant women, depending on the studies that you look at, have a post-traumatic stress syndrome after the birth. 1 to 2% of women. That's the kind of stuff that people normally get who fight in Afghanistan or Iraq. And those birth experience, that kind of trauma, is more likely to happen when the birth is incredibly medicalized and when things happen that women absolutely have no control over. So we're going to talk about home birth, because that's what we need to do when we're talking about our Dutch system. And you have found out by now that that's very unique to our culture. And why is it important to have a choice of a home birth? It's really interesting how many people, even in the Netherlands, and especially from the more obstetric part of our care system, have no clue what's crucial in a home birth. It has nothing to do with a light in the corner, a nice lamp, a nice painting over the bed, with an armchair in the corner of your room, or with soft music. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. A home birth is about a woman being in control. It's her home, it's her environment. The caregiver comes to visit her. That's where she's most likely to be really autonomous and in charge. I have a colleague who's a midwife and also a researcher who explained this to me a few years ago very, very clearly, and it was an enormous eye-opener for me. She explained to me that the same midwife with the same woman in a hospital has a very different experience than when she's at home. Because in a hospital, the midwife too will have to negotiate the system. There'll be other people coming in, there'll be obstetric nurses, there's an unfamiliar environment. She has to have a relationship also with the caregivers in the hospital. And she will not be able to focus as one-on-one on the pregnant woman as she can do at home. And very important for a good birth experience is that you have an empathic caregiver. And empathy means that as a caregiver, you look at what your client needs. It's not about what you think should happen, it's what about your client needs. And that's what much more likely to be the case at home, where there's nothing to disturb and it's just you and your midwife. And it really doesn't matter what you want to do, that's what's going to happen, if it's, of course, safe and feasible. And that's different in a hospital environment. So even if you take your own midwife into the hospital for a short stay hospital birth, it will be a different experience than at home. And I think that's really crucial if we think about why do we even want this crazy system. And many obstetricians I noticed in discussions have no clue. They'll say, why not come to my hospital delivery suite because we have this very nice home-like environment now. That's not what it is about. I think I also need to mention to you now that when we're talking about science, we're talking about studies in groups and about averages. Because I can imagine there are women here who've had previous birth experience who'll think, well, my birth in the hospital was great, I had a wonderful experience, or conversely, I had a home birth which just ended up not so nice and actually was quite traumatic. That's all possible, but what I'm telling you today is what you need to know to maximize your chances of having your best birth experience. It's a little bit like when people tell you, what your midwife should tell you, don't smoke because you increase your odds of having a baby with growth restriction. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. You just maximize your chances of having a healthy baby by not smoking. So that's what we're talking about today. How can you maximize your chances of having your best birth experience? Now to the core of my presentation, because that's what you've come for. I'm going to tell you what the essence is of our Dutch system. I'm going to talk to you about safety issues, because safety is incredibly important. And I'm going to talk to you what constitutes a good birth experience and how you're going to be able to get that. Well, this, in a nutshell, is how our system has been set up. And you've already heard some of this. And I think it's really crucial you realize that we have independent midwives. They have their own practice. They work much like GPs work in other countries. So it means they have their own shop. And in principle, women who don't have a particular pre-existing risk factor will go to a midwife for their pregnancies. Midwives screen pregnant women with respect to risk factors, and they're really, really good at that. And they don't want to take any chances. A woman who's had a previous cesarean section or other problems will not be able to give birth at home. Midwives just don't want to take the risks. So they make sure that when you stay with them, it's very safe to do so. And when you need extra help, you'll be referred to an obstetrician. But that's, I think, and I need to be really honest about this, also the weakness of our system. We have a huge dichotomy between low and high risk, and there's almost nothing in between. Which means if you need an obstetrician, for instance, for pain relief, almost by definition, you become high risk and you can no longer give birth with your primary care midwife. And that's, I think, a major issue that you'll need to work your way around to get your best possible birth experience. So in case of a low-risk pregnancy, women don't see an obstetrician at all. They stay with their midwife. And when they have a low-risk pregnancy, they have a choice of giving birth at home or in a birth center, which are, now there are many more of those now than there were 10 years ago, where independent midwives practice their trade like they do at home. And they can go into the hospital with their midwife. So these are the choices that low-risk pregnant women have. And of course, when you are being referred to an obstetrician, either during your pregnancy or your birth, your choices change, which doesn't mean that you don't have the right to still have your best possible birth experience. But the whole picture will be different. And we also have these trained postpartum home care assistants, and that's really great. They'll stay with you for a whole week after the birth and help with breastfeeding and all kinds of household issues. And that's really a very nice system. And it enables a home birth to take place because they're often around during the birth as well. So in a nutshell, this is our system with the big weakness of this referral. And I'll get back to that at some point.